Hello, as Ruby told you, my name is Kevin Walker. I'm the president and CEO of the Northwest Area Foundation. I'll say more about our organization in a second. But I do stand before you today to test out the idea that low tech is the new high tech, which is to say I don't have a PowerPoint. The dog ate my video, but you're welcome to focus on the NALCAB logo, because when I look at that, I see all of you, and it's very meaningful to me to be here. It was remarkable to walk into this room this morning as that morning plenary was getting started, and to just think about what it means to share the stage with somebody like Nat'l, with somebody like Ramon Leon, our neighbor here in the Twin Cities. What you folks are doing and what those people are doing is really heroic work to build the future of our country. It means a great deal to me to be able to speak with you today, and I particularly am grateful that the NALCAB Fellows are here. Thank you, all of you, for your leadership, what you've already done, and what you will do. We're in your debt, and please keep going. Thank you, Ruby, for the introduction. She said a number of things in those introductory remarks a few minutes ago that I want to circle back to. There was one phrase in particular that she lifted up that we use a lot around the Northwest Area Foundation, and I want to mention it here at the beginning and then circle back to it a little bit later. Before I do, I want to pose a simple question. I need a show of hands. How many people believe me when I say that here in Minnesota, we grow pumpkins as big as dairy cows? Thank you, Larry Kleinman. You started a wave of the gullible. That was more hands than I expected, let me just be frank. But okay, so I want to compare that show of hands to what I get in response to this. Raise your hand if you believe this is true. In the United States of America, prosperity is possible for all. That's beautiful. I did not expect that many hands. I want to circle back to that concept at the end. Oftentimes, when my colleague Gary Cunningham or our program officer Nikki Foster, who's elsewhere in the room, or I use that phrase in public, I can't speak for them, but my experience is people look at me like I just suggested that maybe here in Minnesota we grow pumpkins as large as VW microbuses. So it's a debatable proposition in this world that we live in. I want to talk over the course of the next few minutes about what we mean when we say that, why we think it's true, and how we're trying to make it so. I'm glad that Jen touched on the fact that the Calvert Foundation isn't a foundation. That's a helpful opening for some of what I wanted to share with you, because my sense is that foundations are mysterious and quirky and different one from the other. So I often like to begin by talking about what are these things, where do they come from, and what are they really good for? But I just want to tell that story in terms of the Northwest Area Foundation, and you can extrapolate the rest as you see fit. Our name is a little bit strange, the Northwest Area Foundation, because it makes it sound like maybe we're a community foundation, or maybe we have something to do with the Industrial Areas Foundation, which is a community organizing network. Neither of those is true, nor do we have any roots back to Northwest Airlines. Some of you will remember that corporation of the past. We are actually a private, independent foundation, and our roots are in a particular family, and I want to start there, because the story of what the Northwest Area Foundation is a story that begins with immigration and opportunity and enterprise and asset building. So let me explain. The root of our foundation's wealth is a railroad baron named James J. Hill. So it's just perfect that we're here in a historic depot. James J. Hill was an immigrant not from south of the border, but from north of the border. He was born in Canada, came to this country looking for opportunity, saw opportunity all around him in the late 19th century, and was a profoundly entrepreneurial character. So he crossed the border, he got here, he wanted to do something with his life and his talents. He saw resources sitting, waiting to be exploited. He saw business opportunity teed up and ready, and he went for it. And he built a railroad empire. His nickname was the Empire Builder. Built a rail line that connected the Twin Cities to Seattle and Portland, Oregon. The reason that the Northwest Area Foundation has the quirky geography that we do is simply a matter of organizational tradition and culture. We work in the 8 states that were once touched by the Great Northern Railway. We're the only entity on the face of the earth that calls that the Northwest Area, because it starts in Minnesota and Iowa, and then it includes North and South Dakota, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Across that 8-state section of the country, our mission is to work with people, organizations, and communities to reduce poverty and to build sustainable prosperity. There is a profound connection between that founding enterprise, the railroad, and poverty and prosperity as they exist in our region. The two things aren't unrelated to one another. So where the Northwest Area Foundation came from is that James J. Hill's favored son, whose name was Louis W. Hill, who was his right-hand man in all sorts of enterprises and endeavors, took about $10 million of his fortune back in 1934 and created a foundation. We have grown since then and have reached the position that we're in now, where we do grant making and some direct charitable activity across those 8 states to pursue that mission that I described. When you think about our 8-state section of the country, the prosperity that came from Hill's enterprise is still real. So there is wealth not just in the Hill family, but all across those 8 states that was generated by the existence of a railroad, by all of the industry that grew up along that rail line, by the settlement, the farming communities and other types of settlements across that rail footprint. Resource extraction and exploitation occurred all across the Northwest, partly because this enterprise now existed that allowed people to transport lumber and mineral wealth and farm produce, et cetera. So it is clearly true that Hill and other industrialists like him unlocked what we call the Northwest area to a kind of prosperity. But it's also been true from the beginning that that prosperity was not equally shared. And the consequences of all of that development, settlement by non-native people, are still out there. So it is not irrelevant that we focus on issues of poverty and prosperity building. When you look at our 8-state section of the country, there are, as Ruby mentioned, there are 75 sovereign native nations, 75 reservations in our footprint. There are also vibrant native communities, some of the largest in the country, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, in Seattle, in Portland, and elsewhere. There are rural communities whose demographics are rapidly changing. There are vibrant Latino communities in rural and urban places all across our footprint. And in every case, the well-being and current status of those communities has a lot to do with how did the population get here in the first place. So I have a board member from Idaho whose ancestors came from Mexico to work in the railroad industry in Idaho. The board member at Northwest Area Foundation who hired me came from eastern Montana, dryland farm country. His family for generations had scraped a living out of pretty inhospitable farm country. The whole reason they were there was that somebody built a rail line right through there and then pushed for passage of the Homestead Act, which made it desirable to get a hold of land and farm that country. In other words, the struggle and in some cases the poverty of the small town that he was from was intimately related to the wealth that created the Northwest Area Foundation. So again, the line I was trying to draw there is immigration of Hill from Canada, enterprise and opportunity, and then asset building. We sit now with some assets whose purpose is meant to be charitable, philanthropic, creating positive change in society. We like the fact that we're able to connect those efforts right back to the origin of the wealth. The Northwest Area Foundation has been on a bit of a journey in the 6 years that I've been here that has largely been driven by the fact that our ambitions for what we want to do with our foundation are bigger than our budget. You know, we want to reduce poverty across an 8-state section of the country. There are so many ways that you could attempt to do that you can easily get lost in the complexity of it. We've been working together over the past several years to tighten our focus, and Ruby sketched out for you in her introduction where we've come down in terms of sharpening that focus. So we are committed to working with organizations across our 8 states to help people build their assets. Harken back to the plenary this morning and the information that Ana Patricia from the Boston Fed shared about the asset gap, which I know you're all familiar with, the asset gap between the median white family and the median Latino family or other family of color. That data is really profound. Harken back to this morning's plenary and let's think again about what Gustavo Torres from CASA was saying about immigration reform as a potential economic engine. Think about all the ways in which the economy gets stronger and Latino families get stronger if comprehensive reform happens. One of the things we're interested in is the question, as families receive legal services, can those be paired with asset building resources? Something as simple as an IDA, something as simple as basic financial education, so that as people try to position themselves legally for citizenship, they're also situated for participation in the mainstream economy. Ultimately, what we see is that providing opportunity for all to connect to the mainstream economy on fair terms is as patriotic an idea as I can think of. It's a pro-growth idea. One of the reasons we focus on asset building is that it's not a terribly difficult political topic. In a terribly polarized time in our country, most everybody believes in the idea of building your assets, of starting a small business, of earning and finding out how to keep your money and potentially even to grow it. So that's where we're focusing our attention. And we are focusing as sharply as we can on 2 basic ideas. People need good jobs, and people need to enhance their financial capability if they're going to participate in the mainstream of our economy and if the nation's going to move forward on that basis. So when we say prosperity is possible for all, we really mean it. We don't mean that prosperity is inevitable for all, not by any means. In fact, in a lot of ways, we seem to be on a path towards greater division, less broadly shared prosperity, and instead, as I said earlier, concentrations of prosperity and poverty on 2 ends of a barbell. That is not what we're about. What we're about is figuring out, in this great and wealthy nation, how can we really make prosperity possible for all? You all are doing that work on a daily basis. Hearkening back one more time to this morning's plenary, Ramon's organization, LEDC, is doing that work here and elsewhere in Minnesota on a daily basis. We think it can be done. We also think it's tremendously difficult. We think it's tremendously important. So, and when we say this thing, which we're still trying to figure out, are there better words for it? That word prosperity is a buzzword right now. To some people, it means concentration of wealth, getting rich, enriching your family at the expense of others. I don't think that's what any of you mean when you think about prosperity in your community, and it isn't what we mean. We mean, quite simply, the opportunity to thrive on your own terms. When people challenge me on, well, how are you defining poverty? I try not to go to an academic conversation, and I try to say instead, we don't have to have a debate about exactly how you define poverty. If prosperity is the opportunity to thrive on your own terms, then poverty is the lack of that opportunity. If you don't have that, if the kids in your community, if your family don't have choices, don't have the opportunity to thrive on your terms in a way that makes sense for your culture and your place, then you can't be a fulfilled person, you can't be a thriving community, and that's poverty as we see it. So we are about trying to flip that and truly make it so in this country that prosperity is possible for all.